The disappearing moderate Democrats and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials and the Millennial. Joining me today, of course, is Christopher Hopkins, our producer. And we have with us Brian Chisholm and Matt Morgan, both of whom are members of the Maryland House of Delegates. Welcome back, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Good to be back.
This podcast is called The Disappearing Moderate Democrats because Democrats always seem to get elected in swing districts as moderates. I'm really a moderate. I'm not really that guy who's like Nancy Pelosi or AOC. Well, then they put forth one of the largest spending bills, if not the largest spending bill in American history, the biggest expansion of the welfare state in American history since the 1960s, and calling infrastructure expansion of the welfare state. You know, it used to be just infrastructure with roads and bridges. Now it's infrastructure is expansion of the welfare state. And they're doing all these things, and the moderate Democrats said, no, we can't vote for this. And now they've all buckled. So there is a short article that I just want to read a little bit for. It says, it's from CNBC. It says, House Democrats clear path toward passing $3.5 trillion budget bill and infrastructure plan after breaking the stalemate. And it basically says, House Democrats forged ahead with President Joe Biden's economic plans Tuesday after they broke a stalemate that threatened to unravel the party's sprawling agenda. The 220 to 212 party line vote, so everybody in the House voted along party lines, including the so-called moderate Democrats. The moderate Democrats voted for it. They said they weren't going to. There's no way I'm going to vote for this bill. And now they have voted for it to make it go forward. Thoughts on this, guys, about are there really moderate Democrats?
No, I think if you look
at that one.
I think if you look at America as a whole, the vast majority of people are somewhat conservative in their own beliefs, their own views. And I think that when you go to get elected, especially in some of these areas where there probably is a population of Republicans, they know I'm going to have to act as a moderate or a conservative guy until I get in there. And then when I get in there, I'll be what I'm, then your true colors show.
Then people won't notice what I do.
Right. And you get the pressure put upon you by whoever the leadership is and says,
exactly.
If you don't want to be moved into the mop closet, you vote the way we tell you to do. And this is what happens, both in Annapolis and nationally.
Well, look, the Democratic Party doesn't really reward their members for individual thought. How you get ahead in the Democratic Party is following directions and doing what you're told, and then you move up accordingly. And, you know, the Republicans could actually learn a little bit as far as like taking care of their guys that do go out on a limb and vote a certain way. I think back to all the Democrats that we threw out of office back in 2010 for voting for the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare. And what are they doing now? Well, they take care of their own. They're all working at, got government jobs and state, different departments or, for the university systems. When these guys go out there and stick their neck out for the cause and then move their agenda forward, they always have a safety net to fall back on. And that's why they do it. In the Republican Party, we tend to kick those people out and say, you're on your own. Be interesting to go back and look and see how many Democrats have casted controversial votes. We kicked them out of office. What are they doing now? I don't think they're, sweeping the streets or anything like that.
I agree with you. They circle the wagon better than Republicans do for sure. We kind of run on principle, but they will circle. You could beat a child in front of somebody, and the Democrats will protect you if it means that they continue to hold the power that they do. And that's sad, but it's the way it is because they're the party, they're the sheep party is really what they should be because they all walk in unison. They don't stray apart. And if you start to, they will get you back in the line and they will protect you.
Yep, you're right. They'll march off the cliff like lemons.
Isn't that part of the idea here too, is that if you keep expanding government, like in the massive way this bill is expanding government, what you're doing is you're creating more opportunities for Democrats to run new nonprofits, to run companies that provide services to nonprofits. It's basically a bill that provides for-profit opportunities for Democrat operatives. It's really what this bill does. So I agree with you, Matt. It's like, well, just if you lose as a moderate Democrat, Nancy Pelosi is probably telling them, don't worry, because we'll make sure that you work for this future nonprofit that this bill is going to create, that we're going to vote for, and you're going to make six figures. So don't worry, you're going to be fine. We're going to take care of you.
Oh, it's phony crony capitalism.
It's exactly what it is.
And the scary thing is the numbers that are getting thrown around now, because we've become so numb as a society of what these numbers really mean. And I explained this to somebody one time. I said, listen, 1 million seconds ago was 12 days ago. 1 billion seconds ago was 12 years ago. 1 trillion seconds ago was 100 and some thousand years ago. I'm like, we have lost track of what the difference between $1 billion and $1 trillion is, and we start spending money like this, and it just seems like phony money to people. But eventually, it's got to get paid back, and it gets paid back in either inflation down the road or our grandchildren are going to pay for this until we're bankrupt.
So the WSJ says the Democratic centrists fold on schedule. The Kabuki Theater production of House Democrats closed off Broadway on Tuesday after a very limited run. The vaunted showdown between 9 or so centrists in the Democrat Party's progressive wing ended up with a whimper as the centrists settled for token procedural promise. So to be clear, there are like 9 or 10 centrist Democrats left in the House of Representatives, and they still decided to buckle. It's a faux crisis averted. Nancy Pelosi takes another media turn as a legislative wizard. A Tony Award nomination may be coming, and the progressive juggernaut moves on to try to pass a $4.5 trillion or more in spending and the biggest tax increases since 1968. This was all so predictable. The centrist Democrats had insisted that they wouldn't vote for the progressives' $3.5 trillion budget outline until the House first considered the Senate's $1 trillion infrastructure plan. In the event, they settled for a classic political fig leaf. The House voted 220 to 212 for a rule that deems the $3.5 trillion outline passed. In other words, the centrist Democrats fell in line and voted for this budget anyway. The largest tax increase since 1968, the largest amount of spending. And here's what we don't talk about. It's like, well, what's in the spending bill? I mean, it would probably take a week or 2 weeks to read this bill. It's so thick to find out actually what's in it and what they're spending money on. And I'm sure it's all kinds of inappropriate stuff, all kinds of things that have nothing to do with the function of government. And meanwhile, Afghanistan is falling.
It's the buying of votes.
Yes.
That's all it is. It's the buying of votes with other people's money. And they're going to take this and they're going to go back to their constituents and say, this is what I got for you.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, is anyone concerned that there's only supposedly, 9 centrist Democrats out of 220? I mean, and look, and we shouldn't expect any more for these people because they started their political careers off by folding. Remember when they were just first elected? They were like, we will not have Nancy Pelosi as our speaker. And how'd that work out? I mean, they started off by folding. So that's just where they're at. There's a bunch of, moderate Democrats that are really swing voters throughout the public. But once they get elected in office, I haven't seen a case of a lot of moderates. We have one locally here, and just this year, he voted to raise taxes on the citizenship and give, half the money to illegal aliens.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Matt, because this is part of my theory. Part of my theory is that first you have open borders, which we have because you control all levels of government as the Democrat Party. And then the next thing you do is you pass the largest spending bill in American history and the largest tax increase in American history, at least since 1968, as far as the tax increase. But on the spending side, you expand massively the welfare state to help whom? To buy off whom as the future voters of your party? All of the people crossing the border illegally. This is all a plan, and it's all super integrated. And this is how I think Nancy Pelosi is selling these so-called centrist Democrats. Don't worry, we're going to have a one-party state in no time flat after letting another 10, 15, 20 million people in the country, all of whom are coming here in many. Let's rephrase that. Not all of whom are coming here for the same reason, but many of whom are coming here because they want the free stuff. Not all. Many want opportunities. But let's face it, in the state of Maryland, I want you guys to comment on this because this is important to podcast listeners. In the state of Maryland, tell me I'm wrong that the Democrats constantly expand the welfare state in Maryland. And the first thing they do is they go to Casa de Maryland and they go to all of the immigrant groups and they say, we got you lots of free money. And the next thing, these people, even if they live their lives as conservatives, they're like, guess what? I'm voting for you from now on. Go Democrat Party, free money.
And it's fool's gold. I mean, let's look at some of the programs in the state of Maryland. Let's just look at Baltimore City, where you get free housing, you get free welfare, but it's the most poverty-stricken area in the country, right? This is where crime is out of control. There's gun violence is out of control, and people can't leave because they bought into this fool's gold so many generations ago. Now we have generational poverty, and you cannot get out of that rut unless you break the mold somehow and force your way out of it. But every time you start to say, I'm going to trust the government, can anybody even trust the government after the last 2 years? I mean, who came out better other than the people that are running the programs? They're the only ones. Everybody else, and this is what's sad about even the story previously, the inflation crushes those people quicker than it crushes you and I. If we have to pay an extra $2 for a gallon of gas, we might be able to say, we're going to complain about it, but it will literally destroy lives. And those are the lives that are destroyed quickest is with inflation and these type of things. But they bought into the fool's gold so long ago, they can't get off of that teat now.
Their economic policy is destroying elderly people right now. People on fixed incomes.
And at the same time, buying off the votes of the immigrants who are coming in, the illegal immigrants who are coming in, and at the same time, expanding the welfare state for the people who are sitting on the couch and are perfectly able, many of whom are perfectly able to work. There's the thing. Politicians are terrified of saying what I just said. There are indeed podcast listeners, people who are sitting on the couch and they're not working and they could get a job. And I know this firsthand because we have this issue in our office where people would rather do that, knowing full well they would be better off in their career in the long term by getting back into the workforce. But all the data tells us that the longer you sit on the couch and the longer you stay out of the workforce, the worse it is for your skills. And the more you lose those skills, the farther and farther behind you're getting.
Look, when we talk about entitlements, I like to take the elderly and children off the table. Now let's just talk about.
Sorry.
Now let's just talk about able-bodied people, and it's not government's responsibility to provide for what able-bodied people should be able to provide for themselves.
Well, it's as simple as this to me. We pay people to stay at home, or we tax you to go to work. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to stay at home. And now we've added on top of that. Now you can't be evicted and you shouldn't have to pay your rent. So now you're living rent-free, you're getting paid to stay home, and you're almost discouraged to go back to work because we're going to tax you.
But there has to be an endpoint to this. This is not sustainable.
No,
no economy has ever been built on sit at home, we'll print up some funny money and ship it out to everybody.
But it's absolutely orchestrated, to Mark's point. They know that we believe in empowering people. They believe in empowering programs, and that's where they get their power from. From controlling your life is where they get their power. We believe in, hey, let's give the people the control of their own lives and watch them flourish. But that doesn't happen with the Democrats, and it's proven year after year after year after program after program.
Well, my concern is at some point you killed the golden goose.
Absolutely. Yes. So what about Afghanistan, guys? I mean, we're watching Afghanistan unfold on a daily basis on national TV. And as we see this, of course, because I do this podcast on a regular basis, I have to force myself to watch MSNBC and CNN and ABC and CBS and NBC.
They're upset. So
I was watching CNN and I was wondering, what are they saying about Afghanistan? And anchor Kate Bolduan, I think that's how you say her name, Bolduan or something like that. It's Bolduan. Sorry, Kate, if I got your name wrong. She's interviewing Matthew Dowd, who, by the way, was in the Bush administration, Matthew Dowd. And she asks Matthew Dowd, well, what do you think about this whole thing in Afghanistan? What do you think about how Biden is doing? And you won't believe what Matthew Dowd said. We have that clip, and here it is.
Let's also, but apply this kind of to what we're seeing in Afghanistan. The president standing by his decision with his intention to withdraw U.S. troops from the country by this time next week. And he has faced criticism from the left and the right about how this withdrawal has been executed. But we are seeing a huge bit of progress on the part of the military in getting people out now. But is Biden just inherently betting that the American people are with him on this in the long run? Do you think he is making the right bet?
Well, as you probably are aware, I actually have lauded the president from the very beginning about Afghanistan. He was dealt a horrible situation, and as of today, he's done an extremely good job in this situation. There were many people over the last 7 days that said there's no possible way he could get 50,000 people out, no possible way, and that was the number people thought that had to get out. He's gotten out 70,000 people in the last 8 days, 70,000 people out of Afghanistan in the last days. And I actually think the president, for what he was dealt and what he's done over the course of the last week, should be congratulated on the way this was done. Now, there's many things left to handle over the course of this situation. I think the president's done unbelievable yeoman's work. And he's the first president in 4 presidents to actually get done what the American people wanted done in Afghanistan, which was get out.
So
Man, that Kool-Aid is so good.
that's Matthew Dowd. CNN found someone who said that the president of the United States is doing an amazing job in Afghanistan, considering what he was dealt. Go ahead.
It just reminded me of Baghdad
Baghdad
Bob.
Bob.
Remember him?
Yeah.
Nothing going on here. There's the town is crumbling around him. Oh, nothing to see here. And this guy's almost like he's got his head in the sand. I mean, aren't we supposed to put 600 people on a plane that's supposed to hold 100? I mean, that's what they
So his plan that said went good was to strand tens of thousands of Americans.
Yes.
That's his plan. That it went by design.
It reminds me
My
of
God,
CNN.
they impeached Donald Trump over a phone call
Yes.
that was misunderstood. I mean, they have now people hiding out. Americans hiding out in Afghanistan saying, "Please come get me," and now they're saying that we don't even know if we can get you out in time.
We got people being found in the wheel wells of the plane, people falling off of planes. That's
That's
how
horrible.
desperate it is there.
It's horrible death.
I mean, it's a horrific view. And this guy's like, well, it's just, it's like a 747.
It's going really well. It's going really well. This reminds me of CNN during the riots, the Antifa riots and the BLM riots. And you had CNN,
Peaceful
of course.
protest, Mark. Peaceful protest.
Peaceful protest. Yeah, so you had the CNN reporter,
Mostly.
and he's got like things blowing up behind him and fires and all that stuff. He goes, it's mostly a peaceful protest. And you're like, what the heck am I watching? And you got this guy, Matthew Dowd, is like, the president's doing a great job. And you got like tens of thousands of people trying to get to the airport to get out. You got the Taliban, like, they're ready to shoot anyone on sight for no reason.
But it's straight out of the Democrat playbook, which they've always done, is blame the previous administration. We broke it and we screwed it up, but let's blame the guy before me because so obviously that's an admission right there that things are not good before he goes into this fantasy world that things are going great.
Distortion, distraction, demonizing. That is their playbook.
Yeah.
And at some point, I even think that people at MSNBC are starting to wake up now and realizing, like, holy man, this guy's been on vacation during this time.
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
And his vice president is in Asia.
Yeah.
She's traveling
because
in Asia.
we had a Saigon experience, and nothing says like optics like sending your vice president to Vietnam during the exact same.
So this guy Matthew
scenario.
Dowd that just said that on CNN. Before 1999, he was a Democrat. And then in 1999 to 2007, he was Republican. And then since 2008 to the present, he's an independent. So in other words, he's your quintessential pay for hire or hire for pay, whatever you want to call it, political consultant. You just pay him and he'll just like, well, what would you like me to be today? Would you like me to be a Democrat today or a Republican today? This is the problem, right? These people don't have principles. I mean, and why would who's paying off CNN? To try to destroy America. Who's paying this?
I think that's where they're at. They're just everything they do, and it was really self-evident during COVID, is to push the agenda. This is the utopian that they want to project, and it's like, no problem here. There's no problem here.
Well, they always believe they're the smartest person in the room, and they look at us. They look at the average American, and they have disdain for us. They think we're a bunch of just
right now. They're being laughed at by a bunch of 8th century barbarians right now that all have our military equipment.
And by the way,
we
guys,
leave like $1 billion worth of military equipment there
easily. And get this, in the Daily Caller today, I got this alert. It says exclusive internal numbers show White House is poised to leave several thousand Americans behind enemy lines in Afghanistan post August 31st.
When did that become tolerable to the American? Like, we're going to leave Americans behind. Let's go get some foreign nationals, and we're going to leave Americans behind. That's absolutely disgraceful.
And how can there be people in the city of Kabul, right, who are Americans, and let's say they are diplomats or they are non-military types, right? How can they be there and we're allowing thousands of Afghanis to hop on the planes? Why aren't the American civilians, non-military types, evacuated first before the Afghanis?
Well, that would become the actual plan of withdrawal, right? You have a plan, right? Right, you have a plan.
We had no strategy at all.
And normally the guys with guns that are prepared and trained to be in that type of situation, those are normally the last people that you pull out.
Exactly.
Not the first people. Like, I'm so confused about this, how it went to plan, and he did a great job. There was only about 3,000 troops there in Afghanistan when we withdrew. Now we have 7,000 troops there for a rescue mission. So this is the first withdrawal I've ever seen where you actually escalated and more than doubled the amount of troops that you're there. That makes no logical sense at all. And for anyone to sit there and say, well, this was the plan, I mean, they just look like they have eggs. You look like a bad dad, Bob. You look like a fool.
But it's psychological warfare on some of those military people too, because that is the motto they live by: is no man left behind. Because they will stay and fight, and they'll give up their own life. You see it come. You see servicemen and women come back here all the time, and all they want to do is go back. Look, the people that I serve with are there. I'm going back to save their life. Now we're going to say no. Enough's enough. Let's just come back. We know that all these Americans are going to die, and these military people have to get on a plane and come back. And I think it is an emotional, it's an emotional wreck that's going to wreak upon a lot of these servicemen, and it's something that nobody ever wants to talk about.
Right now, there's a lot of political pundits are comparing this to the Carter administration.
Right.
Honestly,
with Iran, yes.
Well, it's not fair for the Carter administration. That's how bad this screw up is right now. And can't you wait from 6 months from now, seeing like female Americans that were left behind, being politicized, drugged through the streets or whatever. And you know that's coming. And this is a horrible look for this administration.
Agreed.
It's incompetence.
And this podcast is about where are the centrist Democrats? And this really brings us back to this subject in Afghanistan. Where are the centrist Democrats in state legislatures? Where are they at the federal level to basically say, look, this is unacceptable. As a country, there's no thing that should unify us more than wanting to bring Americans home safely and leave in a way that that demonstrates honor and demonstrates our values and speak to those values. None of that has been done here. Where are the centrist Democrats talking about this issue with Afghanistan?
They're silent. They're scared of their base to stand up and talk about it. I mean, where's the vice president of that?
Why are they afraid of their base? Why do you think?
I don't know. I mean,
power.
I don't know. I've never seen them criticize. When
their own, they don't criticize their own. Yeah.
When the policies they were pushing failed to produce the results they were promising, I've never seen them come out and say, "Yeah, man, I screwed up here. We should have been doing this." No, it went by plan. This is organized.
And it's the same reason we have problems in the Republican Party. People are now registering more independent than Republican, and the reason is because people are demonized, and people they're gonna make you the enemy. So I think a lot of these centrists learned quickly, if I say anything even conservative or that I back the military, that they're going to be then made the enemy, and that's what and that's why even if you read like our local papers, I can tell you right now, the Capitol hasn't done one story on Afghanistan. So they think if they don't write about it, then it's not real news, and they can't.
And that's working, by the way. That is working. It's working with a lot of Americans when they're not reading about it or hearing about it on their TV channels that they watch or the newspapers that they read. As far as they're concerned, it's not happening.
Perception is reality.
Exactly.
Well, I'm starting to get a little bit like encouraged by this because you've seen like comedians that are on far left, like Bill Maher, start coming out and start talking about this.
Thank goodness.
Right. I mean, but you'll never get a Democratic politician to sit there and do that.
And we're big fans here at Mark and the Millennials of Bill Maher. We play a lot of his clips all the time because he's funny and he does make fun of both sides.
But he's a true liberal, and true liberals are almost gone now. You're talking about because liberalism is, let's question the government. Let's question everything. Now, all of a sudden, nobody wants to question anything. Whatever the government says, wear a mask and you're going to survive.
Look, I've been saying for a long time, the problem with the Democratic Party right now, it's not that they're liberal. They've always been liberal. The problem is now they're totalitarian.
That's exactly right.
And socialist. So we'll stop on that note to go on to the next subject, which is really important, podcast listeners. There's a national mullet competition. There's a national mullet competition. Yes, you heard that correctly. And in News Talk Radio, 1290 AM in Texas, it says Texas dude is competing in the National Mullet Championship. And it says, here's the update. I've been made aware that another awesome Texan is part of this National Mullet Championship. Chaz Taylor is also competing and is a wrestler as well. Okay. He actually has some stuff donated to the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame in downtown Wichita Falls, Texas. You can check out Chaz online. I normally say Texas man, but the dude felt 100% more appropriate. The iconic businesses in front and part and back look like they've been controversial haircuts for decades since the 80s. Anyway, this particular article isn't very well written, needless to say, but the mullet it started in the 80s, right? So now there's this national mullet competition, and apparently there's even like a mullet Hall of Fame. So it's called mulletchamp.com. It's the Mullet Hall of Fame, and it has pictures of famous mullet wearers, including Andre Agassi, Billy Ray Cyrus, and Joe Dirt.
Joe Dirt. I was just going to say that. I pulled him up on my laptop.
Mel Gibson, from the 80s, like he totally has a picture of him. Mario Lopez had a mullet at the time.
I mean, the 80s were great, weren't they?
And Bono. So there's a mullet competition, and apparently you went up to $2,500. And that's the deal. So we have a clip on this. There's one gentleman, he's originally from Minnesota, but he's in Austin now. And he has a mullet, and he's entering, and he thinks he has a good chance. And we have that clip, and here it is.
Somebody's going to use it.
It took 3 years to get his mullet to where it is now. This was his hair then, and now he's rocking it. His mullet has even made it to the national stage. Curtis is competing in this year's USA Mullet Championships.
Who would have thought I made the top 25 in the nation? The only one from Minnesota, so just trying to represent.
And Curtis is facing some tough competition. Look at these guys. But no matter the outcome, this mullet is here to stay.
So the mullet is here to stay. And these folks, by the way, they're not just like, wearing a mullet because they're trying to go into the competition. This is the style they like. I mean, they like the mullet thing. Would that work for you, Matt?
God bless them. I mean, I've tried to grow a mullet myself many times, and I can't make the commitment, the long hair and stuff.
Well, you're kind of a child of the 80s, aren't you?
Yeah, I am, man. I do. I like the hard rock. I like the stuff from the 80s.
Did you ever have a mullet?
No.
Oh, really?
Unfortunately, I mean, like I said, I've tried to grow one a few times.
Because you're from a county where mullets probably really in.
I'm thinking that would have been good for my political career back in the day. But, my hair is just a little too curly to grow a mullet. But, I mean.
Just need a classic car,
Chisholm, I mean, you would look good with a mullet. We could go with that full name, Chiz Dog.
Yeah.
Chiz Dog.
Right. If it was a guarantee that I was going to keep my hair, I'd give it a shot.
Well, you get the side mullet.
Yeah. And Mark, I don't know if you know, but they had a kids champion too. So it is here to stay because the number one guy is not only missing his teeth there, but he looks like he's 5 years old.
Yes.
So it's generational.
I like that. So it's intergenerational. Apparently, you have a mullet and you've got to have a kid with a mullet, I mean, it's kind of like an 80s icon, show that you would see where everybody's got the mullet. I don't know. I think I saw this story. I had to bring it on Mark and the Millennials because I think it's just a really great idea. I mean, it really gets a lot of people organized. And I think we should do a Democrat mullet competition. Nancy Pelosi with a mullet.
I could see Steny Hoyer with a mullet.
Chuck,
I mean, I could. I mean,
Chuck Schumer with a mullet.
Yeah.
AOC with a mullet.
Oh,
yeah. Well, you know what?
Maxine Waters with the. You ever notice you never see any black people with mullets? I mean, that's interesting.
I'm just waiting
right?
for the Democrats to mandate this.
And by the way, Democrat listeners, this is not a racist statement. You show me a black guy with a mullet, okay? I haven't seen that. I think it was really more of like a kind of
they do the blend.
What of a white phenomenon for whatever reason. Okay, I mean, I'm not, but it's true. Everybody's awkwardly quiet, but it's true.
Inevitably,
it's true.
I was trying to think if I've ever saw a black guy with a mullet. I don't think I have.
Here's my point: the National Mullet Hall of Fame. When you go online, it's all pictures of white guys with mullets.
And many of them sing country music for some reason.
And maybe cancel culture should go after them. Maybe they should be canceled because there are no black guys with mullets.
Well, that means there's just an opportunity. I mean, if you're out there and you want to compete,
are there any
$2,500 for you? Grow the mullet.
Why don't we have a Republican mullet competition? You got to show up with a mullet. So that would be
well. There'd be too many. It's too many to compete.
Yeah,
but that'd be a good fundraiser. That'd be a good fundraiser, especially in your county.
You have to plan it way ahead, though. It takes a little while to grow that.
It does take a little while.
Mohawks were in for a little while, and then they went straight to mullet. And I guess you lack the commitment to go full Mohawk. You'd just go mullet.
Yeah, I mean the Mohawk. I actually thought that was at least stylish.
Mr. T had one of those.
Yes, that was stylish. Yes, so there was a black guy that had a mohawk, but it was not a mullet.
I work out with a guy in my gym that has a mohawk. He looks like a Viking.
Oh,
really? He's all tatted up, big dude, mohawk.
Wait, the guy that stormed the Capitol that had like the
one with the antlers,
the big hat and the antlers. Was that a mullet? Did he have a mullet?
That was It's probably a wig, but
Okay.
I mean,
Is
he
he
disqualifies a mullet.
Yeah.
Is he disqualified?
See, that's who all the Democrats thought were going to become president, I guess, after the insurrection, was the mullet head guy that looked like he was
with the horns.
with the horns, coming like on a walk from the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
Yes.
So next up, podcast listeners, we have Go Woke or Go Broke, and that is canceling the Notre Dame Leprechaun. Yeah, you heard that right. So the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, they're being asked to cancel the Leprechaun. So Notre Dame, in response, gives a fiery defense of the Leprechaun mascot after the survey deems it offensive. So the nickname, it says, Notre Dame swatted comparisons between its nickname and 3 others deemed most offensive. So apparently there is a survey, and Notre Dame pushed back on the scrutiny over its Leprechaun mascot because I guess there were student groups and others who wanted to cancel the Leprechaun because it's offensive or racist. So Notre Dame, nicknamed the Fighting Irish, was said to have one of the most offensive mascots in the United States, according to a survey from the Quality Logo Products blog. The Leprechaun came in 4th place behind Hawaii's Vili, is that how you say it? Vili, and the Warrior, San Diego State's Aztec Warrior, and Florida State's Osceola and Renegade. So apparently they were number 4, Notre Dame. It's worth noting that there is no comparison between Notre Dame's nickname and the mascot and the Indian and Warrior names and mascots used by other institutions, such as the NFL team formerly known as the Washington Redskins. The school said in a statement to the Indy Star on Monday, none of these institutions were founded or named by Native Americans who sought to highlight their heritage by using names and symbols associated with their people. Quote, our symbols stand as celebratory representations of a genuine Irish heritage at Notre Dame, a heritage that we regard with respect, loyalty, and affection. So it's interesting because I'm sure the people that were offended aren't even Irish, right? In other words, the people that have filled out the survey and like, it's a bad thing, a leprechaun. So first of all, what is a leprechaun?
I mean, I always thought, it's the emblem of a leprechaun, but it's the Fighting Irish, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They're stereotyping, and I guess Irish people fight. They're being microaggressed. Are Irish people upset about this, or is it somebody else's panties in a bunch?
He's a short Irishman.
To me, a leprechaun is always that thing that you see in Ireland when you're incredibly drunk. And you think you see a leprechaun, he's bringing you a pot of gold, right? Isn't that the whole idea?
I thought it was at the end of a rainbow.
The leprechaun.
Well, that was my question. Are they going to ban Lucky Charms as well? Because a few podcasts back, Notre Dame was trying to ban Chick-fil-A. I was like, these people hate all things good. Lucky Charms, the leprechaun.
So if it tastes
Chick-fil-A.
good, it's out of Notre Dame, right?
Exactly. Who's in charge of admissions there?
I used to love it when Notre Dame used to actually focus on like football and education and stuff like that. Yeah, I've got a lot of friends that graduated from Notre Dame.
But what's interesting is the left really wants to destroy all tradition and all institutions under the guise of it's offensive. And it's like, show me what about a leprechaun is offensive? Because a leprechaun isn't mimicking an individual person or even a group. It's basically this
I think there's a lot of that
thing that exists in Ireland.
I think there's a lot of that. I also think there's a lot of these people are miserable. They wake up,
they're angry.
They wake up angry, miserable, and it's like something comes on the TV. Oh, NBC, Notre Dame's battling Florida. Damn, that Irish guy really pissed. I mean, that's racist. We need to get that off here. It's stereotype. They're angry about everything. They're offended by everything.
They are offended by everything.
And I always thought sticks and stones.
Absolutely.
At some point.
Chris, what were you going to say? Is our producer, Chris. You were going to say something. You had something on your mind about this.
Well, leprechauns are mythical creatures. I don't understand who's upset about
Well, so are moderate Democrats that are elected. That's like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster.
They do hate the individual, though, and that's their goal. And we talked about it earlier. If you're talking about the Democrat Party or those on the left, they believe in the sheep mentality, where nobody's got an individual identity, and including a leprechaun, evidently, because they want everything to look the same and vanilla and just follow in the footstep, because that's where power comes from.
I'll just tell you that I think Daniel Snyder, the owner of the Washington football team, is probably sitting back saying, I told you so.
Exactly.
I told you.
So you do know that my wife works for Prince George's County School System. They had to send out a school-wide apology because somehow somebody put out an email saying if we have a contest, and the winner's going to get Washington Redskin tickets.
Ooh.
And it was the biggest deal in the world. All of a sudden, they had to apologize to everybody for using the term Redskin.
They were microaggressed.
Yeah.
I saw a guy yesterday. He was walking literally down the street on the way to the podcast. I was in my car, and I looked out the window, and podcast listeners, you'll love this. It was a black guy, and he was wearing a Washington Redskins jersey, right? And I'm thinking to myself, apparently there isn't a problem with a lot of people, but there is a problem with apparently the Leprechaun, because the Leprechaun, he's green. Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering, exactly who are we discriminating against? Green people?
Short people.
I mean, have
short
people?
Irish people.
The short Irish people, yeah. Randy Newman wrote a song about it.
Short people have no reason to live. That one.
Right.
And podcast listeners, you'll be happy to know that our producer, Christopher Hopkins, is actually somewhat of an expert on music, including like classic stuff. So he, like, you say a song and he knows every single song can possibly be said. He understands them all. So next up, podcast listeners, there is a U.S. Naval Academy cheating scandal. And in Fox News, it reports the U.S. Naval Academy cheating investigation leads to 18 midshipmen being expelled. 82 were found to have violated integrity guidelines, but were retained, which, by the way, podcast listeners, is highly unusual. Here's what's highly unusual. Not that people have cheated and gotten expelled, but that some people had been part of it and weren't. That's because apparently it's 100 people. It's 100. So imagine being the United States Naval Academy. You have about 1,100 people per grade. So you have about 4,400 people, and 100 people from one grade alone get removed and expelled. And the Naval Academy, if you were expelled in your junior year or later, you have to repay the United States government. That's a big deal. In fact, I've had people comment about this to me before. This is something that we know a little bit about, not cheating, that is, but we know a little bit about the Naval Academy because it's in our backyard in Annapolis, Maryland. My brother went to the United States Naval Academy, and I just remember them being incredibly strict on this particular issue. Why is this happening? I mean, this is the last place cheating is supposed to happen.
Well, I do know that West Point runs on what's called an honor code, and the Naval Academy runs on what's called an honor concept, which means you will not cheat, lie, or steal. And in most universities, when it comes to athletes or other things, some people get preferential treatment, obviously. And it's about the mighty dollar, because you're going to give your quarterback that's bringing 1 million people in to watch football a lot more leniency than you would the mathematician, because nobody tailgates or buys season tickets to watch Mathnasium. But when we're talking about these institutions, Naval Academy, Air Force, West Point, Citadel, they're held to a higher standard because they are then going to be put in a position of protecting other people's lives. So there should not be any lenience for this at all. And every Naval Academy grad that I've talked to, every Air Force grad I've talked to, it makes them mad too. And they want to see the consistency. So why is there not the consistency? Do we have an honor concept in an honor code, or do we not? Or is this just another mirror of the rest of society where we say, okay, these people get away with it, these people don't, and we make things, we don't live up to a high standard anymore.
Interesting.
Whereas they used to have a high standard.
What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty accurate. The reason why this happened is they put a system in place because of COVID, where I think these kids were testing online and they weren't being proctored correctly.
They were using the Google machine.
And they were using the Google machine. And it's like, well, I mean, I'm not going to look at outside sources except for on this laptop. So you could argue the point like, well, these kids didn't want to get a bad grade. I mean, they wouldn't, maybe fudge the numbers. I don't think they're bad people. And maybe that's the reason why the discrepancy in the penalty so much. But yeah, I mean, it is concerning. And it's concerning just because it's another black mark on one of our institutions that we kind of always held to a super, super high standard. I know that I've known many people that have graduated from the Naval Academy. One's a good friend and running up there in Anne Arundel County as for a county executive. And these are really super high quality people.
They're great people. They really
very
are.
Motivated.
And we should underscore that. The vast majority of people in the United States Naval Academy are wonderful people, and they are not cheaters and so forth. But I do think that there is a trend in the United States, especially in the military academies and elsewhere, where if you look at who's president of the United States, if you look at who's vice president of the United States, if you look at how people get elevated so many times without actually having achieved anything, I mean, we see this ourselves in the legislature, right? How many people do you know in the legislature that you serve with? Some of them are on our side, by the way. Some of them are Republicans, but most are Democrats who really haven't achieved anything in their lives other than having A, gotten a college degree, and B, run for office. In between those two things, they've done nothing. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. And I think a lot of these folks in military schools see this and they're like, well, why am I working so hard? Why am I being so honorable and following this progression of merit if we have a society that no longer supports merit?
It's frowned upon.
Yeah,
I mean, merit really is frowned upon by a certain portion of our population, where it's not about what you achieved. It's about your skin color or about what gender you are, how you identify.
Well, the problem for us, I mean, and this is getting a little broader topic than what happened at the Naval Academy, but that's where our military there, right? And when you don't strive for merit and you point people based on some other attribute like skin color, you get situations like we led off the podcast, like in Afghanistan.
Yes.
And if you're going to,
Yes.
I mean, you can't keep pushing people through that are ultimately going to make bad decisions. And especially when they're leading, like they might be leading your sons and daughters in the battle. And so that's just not right.
You bring up the perfect segue. In the Wall Street Journal, Harry Jackson wrote an op-ed, "Should military officers be chosen by race?" An admiral's revealing remark about naval promotion. Imagine a U.S. Navy destroyer under enemy attack. Your son or daughter or niece is on that ship, having volunteered to serve. The decisions made by the captain of that warship make the difference between life and death for your loved one and all the sailors on board. It matters how that captain and other commanders are selected. Do Americans want leaders who are promoted based on intelligence, aptitude, skill, or excellence? Or do they want to entrust their children to those who are selected to bump up the military's diversity statistics? Well, and so this particular, I'm not going to read the whole article, but it's worth reading. And it goes on to talk about just that. The Navy is indeed doing that. It's no longer about merit. So if you're in the United States Naval Academy and you're taking these incredibly challenging tests, and it determines which direction you go into, which is the case when you graduate from the academy, a lot of times your direction of military service depends on your grades. And certainly if you see that there are folks who are getting advanced because of the way they look, you might say to yourself, then why wouldn't I cheat? Because that's cheating.
Yeah, the same guy that I was talking to earlier today that wrestled at Naval Academy, he was saying that he just had an article that was emailed to him because he gets all the alumni news, and he flew 260 helicopters. And there was this big article about the first openly gay team had flown the 260, and he said they shoot pictures of them out there with rainbow flags. And his point was, who really gives a shit? Who cares what they are? Can you save our lives or not? Because if you're on the ground getting ready to be picked up, you don't care what gender or what sexuality they are picking you up. You just want them to do the job and do it well, because it is real lives at stakes, and nobody really cares what rainbow flag you want on the side of the helicopter. But that's what gets promoted now. To your point, it's not about excellence anymore. It's not about achievement. It's about how do you identify.
And that's why you need leadership from the very top, the president of the United States and the vice president of the United States. You need that leadership to speak to what our values are as a country, and that you must advance based on merit. And we don't have that.
Hold on, Mark. How can he do that? He can't get up there and give that speech. He picked his vice president based on gender and color.
Yes.
I mean, that was the requirement. So, I mean, if you're thinking that you're going to get leadership from the Biden administration on this, that's not probably going to happen anytime soon.
That's a fact.
What happened the entire time we were growing up? I mean, we used to grew up and was raised like Martin Luther King. You judge a man by the content of his character, not by the color of his skin. And that's worked out for really, really well for us for a long time. But for some reason, mostly from gained by the opposition here, that trying to push their agenda, which always results in more power and more stuff for them. They're driving this group think right now, and it's unbelievably dangerous.
It's working. It's working too.
It is dangerous.
And if it's found its way into the service academies, which it has, then you can imagine how deep it is into the military. And
the main general, what's the general's name? His name escaped me, but he's like super woke. And, and this is how you end up with a super woke agenda in the military. You're pushing policies like that, and it results in leaving thousands of Americans behind enemy
in
lines.
Afghanistan.
Yeah.
We might as well send
Good job. Went as planned.
We're sending Spirit Airlines to go get those.
Spirit Airlines, that's right.
No luggage.
No luggage.
So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer? Here it is.
Dum 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 dum.
And it's the dumbest bill in America, and it is forcing public school athletes to wear COVID ankle bracelets. That's right. Public school athletes have to wear ankle bracelets in the state of Washington, not Washington, D.C., the state of Washington. The devices were purchased with funds from the American Rescue Plan. That was one of the stimulus bills that passed. And the plan says, that particular stimulus bill, it requires that 20% of that money go to elementary and secondary public school disaster relief fund. So the schools in Washington state, at least one district in particular, decided what were they going to use the money for? Well, they could have used it for, I don't know, private tutors. They could have used it for private vouchers to send kids to schools that were more appropriate during this COVID emergency. They could have used it for all kinds of things. Oh, they used it for ankle bracelets for athletes. That's what they decided to do. So we actually have a little bit of story on this, but before we do, the superintendent of public schools of this particular public school system, he had a statement, and the statement, of course, he wouldn't say it himself. He just sent the statement to the news station, and the news station read the statement. We have that clip of his statement explaining why he's doing this, and here it is.
He says we received grant funding that specifically included provisions to support higher risk athletic programs. And we used some of those funds to pay for athletic proximity monitors. We are using these monitors for high contact and moderate indoor contact sports. The monitors are for both staff, coaches, and students on the field, regardless if they are vaccinated or unvaccinated. If a student or coach tests positive, we will have immediate information regarding athletes and coaches and contacts so we can more tightly determine who might need to quarantine.
So your child's playing football, your child is wrestling, your child's playing soccer or basketball. Your child has to wear this ankle bracelet to let them know where he is and who he is in contact with, which, by the way, is pretty much everybody on the team because he's playing a sport, which in and of itself is stupid. Thoughts on this, Brian?
It already reminds me of The Longest Yard with Burt Reynolds. You know, when all the inmates were out there playing the guards, and they had to keep them corralled with guns. But in this case, all they would have needed was some COVID bracelets. It would have saved a lot more money because then you can watch them. And I actually feel bad on several levels for the athletes. But you know, when you're in high school, one of the best things to do is like sneak out or whatever and hang out with a teammate or whatever. These guys can't go anywhere because they're being monitored the whole time. It's almost like these guys are almost in a zoo. It's almost like a chain gang at this point where you can't go anywhere without somebody watching where you are.
And Matt, where are the parents at on this?
Yeah.
I mean, how much freedom are you willing to give up to play a sport in high school? I mean, this is just completely not fair for these kids. And I tell you, it's absolutely ludicrous that people in education are pushing this. First of all, they got a grant. The way I'm thinking how government works is, you know, they got a grant. We had to spend it on something. I'm going to virtual signal to everybody that I'm going to contact trace my way out of this by putting ankle bracelet. Has a country, a state, a city, anywhere in the world contact trace their way out of COVID?
I don't know, but why don't we just put the bracelets around people's necks like they do in some of these sci-fi films, you know? It's like
or maybe one of those cones like the dogs you get, like your dog cone.
Yeah, the cone of silence from Get Smart.
What's the excuse we get about the border all the time about illegal immigration? Well, we catch and release them, but they're supposed to come back to court, but we can't find them. So if that's the case, why don't we just use these bracelets for that? Everybody that comes across
idea.
Let's put that bracelet on. We can find you real quick.
So let me get this straight. We're putting ankle bracelets on athletes in public schools to make sure that when they get in contact with other athletes that have COVID, whether they were vaccinated or not. We want to know who they have been in contact with. But your idea is let's just reallocate those instead to the people coming across the border and saying, "Hi, sir, welcome to America. We're putting a bracelet on you." And then we'll know where you are.
And it is important because they said that 40% of the cases in Texas were from people that had just recently illegally come across the border. So if they really care about the spreading of the virus, then why not put them on there? Because obviously you can buy a lot of them if with this money.
Look, we're all Republicans here. I mean, we have a very
conservatives,
right? Yeah. That's a better label. Cavalier way of looking at COVID. You know, some of this stuff is just out of our control, and this is the situation that we're in. But imagine if 40% of the people that are crossing illegally across the border was coming with something like Ebola or something like way more deadly.
Well, they certainly have COVID, I'm pretty sure, 40%.
And this is just a colossal collapse by the Biden administration down there, and just really in society, and tells you where they're willing to, we have people in this society willing to like ankle monitor students, and that's okay, perfectly acceptable. But they're the same ones that say, you can't ask an ID to vote. You can't put the same requirement on someone here.
But we can contact trace your child.
What are we doing? Yeah. Like where does this end in society?
But we need to know where the 15-year-old wide receiver from Washington is.
Yeah, exactly.
At all times.
Because he talked to 3 people that might have it. Even though, statistically speaking, it doesn't really affect children.
How about if that 15-year-old wide receiver, the contact tracer from the public school goes, all right, so we found out that you were playing football, in practice, and we had the contact tracer because you now have been in contact with someone with COVID. And the contact tracer says you were under the bleachers. What were you doing under the bleachers for an hour?
If I was a Washington State athlete, the first thing I would do is go to my coach and say, listen, I haven't told anybody this, but I'm an illegal.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
They'll take that bracelet right off.
So get this, in the Daily Mail, this made it all the way across the pond to England. It says Washington school is blasted for making students wear ankle monitors so they can be alerted if another player tests positive for COVID. Eatonville High School has received backlash after implementing a measure in which athletes have to wear ankle monitors tracing COVID-19. And so it just goes on to talk about the school principal, the superintendent, and so forth. And of course, a bunch of parents naturally have weighed in, and they're not happy about it, of course, and they've pushed back. One parent said, over my dead body, my kids will not participate and very well may take them out of school and do online schooling if I have kids in that school. So when we do the Dumbest Bill in America, guys, and we do in the Dumbest Bill in America podcast listeners, it really is based on a bill. And this is the American Rescue Plan stimulus bill that this bill was in. So when you're superficial about bills and you say to people, oh, you know what? That's a good bill because it's a stimulus bill. It's going to stimulate the economy. Well, guess what? The bills are so big now. They have this stuff in them that gives discretion to school districts to do really bad and creepy things. Thoughts? Brian? He's speechless.
I am speechless because
he's thinking about how much trouble you'd be in if you were contact traced in high school.
But you're right. Everybody gets a little bit of candy with these bills now, and it's all about buying power and buying votes. And they figure out it's all a calculated decision that they're making. This is what we can do for you to make sure that you stay in power, and this is what we can do for you. But they're using the producers of this country's money. And the producers of the future. If you don't have any money, you can't pay anything back. I'm sorry, you just can't. If you're not producing a good or a service, you can't pay anything back. Your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren are going to have to, because eventually it all has to get paid back. And it's the most selfish act in the world to continue to print money and give it out to people like it's nothing and expect that it's not going to have a negative result down the road, because it will.
I mean, contact tracers on many of these individuals coming in from Afghanistan, I think wouldn't be a bad idea. And of course, a lot of podcast listeners are going, well, that's really extreme. I mean, they're trying to flee. Well, we actually don't know who these people are. We're in such a hurry putting, 800 of them in a big aircraft, carrier or flight, I should say, at a time. We're in such a hurry to do that. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they believe. We don't know if they share our values. We don't know if they're going to share our values. We don't know if they're going to turn into terrorists or if they really were terrorists already. I mean, it's just exactly what you said, Brian, about people crossing the border. And it's not that we don't want people coming to America and wanting this opportunity, but everything is upside down. We're allowing people in the country with COVID. We're allowing people in the country that don't share our values. We don't even know who half of them are, I'm sure. And yet we're contact tracing and putting bracelets that are monitoring teenagers.
What we do know is the Cubans vote overwhelmingly Republican or conservative. So what have we done with them? No, you stay home. We're not coming to get you. But we will do everything to keep you out. Do not show up in South Florida because you might change the Florida vote. So you guys stay there. But we'll take the Afghanistan people who we have no idea who they are. But the calculation, once again, is they will vote Democrat.
Oh, of course they will. And the same thing is with Eastern Europeans, the former Soviet bloc countries. We don't allow a lot of Eastern Europeans into the United States because when they get here, trust me, I know a bunch of them. I have a bunch of them in my district. In fact, they vote Republican because they lived under communism. They have grandparents and parents who lived under communism, and some of them themselves lived under communism because it really wasn't that long ago. And they want nothing to do with the agenda of the Democrat Party. Matt, final thoughts on dumbest bill in America?
Well, again, it's one of the dumbest ideas in America. I mean, I'm just wondering at what point are the American public going to sit there and say, you know what, we've given up enough freedoms.
Right.
Enough is enough. We're now on day 530 of 15 days of flattening the curve. Right. And people, we get this discussion all the time because you didn't know what COVID was at the beginning of this. So, I mean, shut down, try to figure things out. And there was an end point. This looks never ending at this point.
And I agree. And as far as I'm concerned, Matt, we still don't know what COVID is because the Chinese haven't come clean to us as to whether this is a weapon or whether this is something else. And if it's a weapon and the weapon keeps morphing into something that can eventually kill us and gets worse and worse over time, then you know what? It's about damn time our government tells us that it's a weapon, in which case maybe more people will be amenable to these kinds of things. I don't think I would ever, but you know what I'm saying.
Whatever happened, I mean, this is a philosophical difference between the two parties right now, where people like us are sitting there like, well, we need to have the information, be transparent, and we'll make my own informed decisions. We believe in treating people as adults. The other side just thinks you're an idiot.
Right.
You're a moron. And you're going to do what we're telling you. If
wear an ankle bracelet. Yes.
Right. If you don't do what we're going to tell you, we're going to come up with a new innovative way of making your life miserable. Yes. We're going to make you test every day, once a week. We're going to hold your kid out of school. You're not going to be able to get to restaurants. And apparently, if your kid wants to participate, they're going to have to wear an ankle bracelet. So at what point do people say, you know what? Enough is enough. We've given you a shot. You've lied to us almost every step of the way here.
You see that blooming up throughout the world, and you also see it here because you can only steal people's freedoms for so long before they're going to start to fight back, and they're starting to fight back. But that's why the media feels like their power is we're going to villainize you, no matter what. If you don't listen to us, we're going to villainize. Because if Matt Morgan comes out and says, "I'm not putting up with this. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm not." Eventually, more and more people are going to start to stand next to Matt Morgan and say, "You're right. Let's do this together." But if they can isolate Matt Morgan and make you look like a fool, that's where their power comes from. But I do believe it's starting to well up in many people that we're not putting up with this anymore.
And
final thoughts here.
Well, this is a big deal because we're looking at vaccine passports and mask mandates for schools.
Yes,
and it's an important point. There is. It's not about, to me, it's not about masks. It's not about vaccines because I'm a big proponent of masks and vaccines. If you want to wear a mask, go for it. I think you should have the right to do that. If you want a vaccine, you want 1, 2, 3, 4, go for it.
Yep.
I'm all for it. Whatever you think makes you feel the most safe. The problem comes in is using these heavy-handed tactics by the government. What are you willing to do? When we're talking about cutting people off from society, are we talking about putting a officer at the local grocery store that you can't get in unless you have a vaccine passport? Are you talking about arresting people and forcibly giving them injections?
Right.
I mean, I don't know if we're really that far away from that. You start asking these questions like, "Oh, that's crazy. You're a bunch of crazy people."
That's good.
Well, I'm not sure we're that far away from it. It's very scary.
And that's a good way to end it. And I have to say this, this bill, this funding was hidden in the American Rescue Plan. And so we can only imagine what's being hidden in the Nancy Pelosi $4.5 trillion spending bill that's going to also try to be very Stalinist in our lives and try to take over our lives. In any event, that is the dumbest bill in America, forcing public school athletes to wear COVID ankle bracelets. And that's it from Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins, and our guests, Matt Morgan and Brian Chisholm. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.